Good morning, guys. Today we're going to continue with our lesson on the greatest common factor. This is going to be part 2, notes 2.02. So we're still going to be using the skills that we learned from the last lesson, which is, finding the GCF of a given algebraic expression. And last class we were mainly focusing on only factoring out only a number or only a variable. But today's lesson we'll be focusing on factoring out both a number and a variable from an algebraic expression. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the first example. Let's take a look at the first example. And so let's see what are the instructions for this one. It says factor the following algebraic expressions. So we're given this expression, make sure to show all your work. Okay, so what we were doing last class is we were identifying the GCF. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that for this example. So looking at these two, let's look at the numbers first, 8 and 12. What number can I divide both of them by? Well, I can divide both of them by 2, but is that the largest? Is that the greatest value that they have in common? Well, I think they have a larger one, right? They can both be divided by 4. So I'm going to say, as far as the numbers go, 4 is part of the GCF. Now let's look at the letters, the variables. They both have one x, right? This one has 2 x's, x squared, and this second one has 1x. But do both of them have x squares or 2 x's? No, right? So the most x's they have in common is that they have 1 x in common. Okay, so then we found our GCF. Our GCF is 4x. So remember what we did last class. We divided both terms by that GCF. And then we set up a parentheses for what we're going to get when we divide. And what do we put in front of the parentheses? The GCF, right? So let's see, what are we going to put inside the parentheses? It depends on what we get when we divide. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. Bring down the minus. Just bring down this minus here. 12 divided by 4 is 3. And x divided by x cancels. And so this is my answer for the first one. All right, so this is kind of a basic one. And again, we're factoring out both a number and a variable. So that's the only difference for today's lesson. All right, so let's look at example 2. Let me slide over here. Okay, example 2, again, we're going to identify the GCF. Now, as far as numbers go, we have a negative 1. Remember, if it just has a negative in front, then we assume that there's a negative 1 here. Okay. And they don't have anything in common, but I do want to, make sure that the first term is positive. So I'm going to take out a negative 1. So I'm going to say, as far as my GCF, I'm going to say they have a negative 1 that they can be divided by. Now, as far as the variables go, the letters, do they both have 3 A's? No. Do they both have 2 A's? No. Do they both have at least one A? Yes, they both have at least one A. So that's my GCF. And so we're going to divide both of these by negative 1A. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and write it just because what's negative 1 times A? That's negative A. So I'm going to rewrite it as just negative A. Okay, so we're going to set up a parentheses here, and then we're going to put negative A in front. And so I could ask, what's a negative divided by negative? It's a positive. A to the third divided by A leaves me with A to the second. And then a positive 8 divided by a negative 1 is a negative 8. And A divided by A will cancel. So actually, let me go ahead and bring this parenthesis closer so that my final answer is this one. Okay, and again, notice that we factored out a number and a variable. Okay. And I also want to mention, I like to factor out the negative, especially if the first term is negative. Make sure you factor out the negative 1 so that the term inside the parentheses, the first one, is positive. It'll be useful as we work with more complex equations later on. Okay, one more example. Oh, sorry, no, actually there's two more. Let's look at this third example. And again, let's identify on the side here what our GCF is going to be. Looking at the numbers, can they all be divided by something? 15, 3, and 18. And keep in mind that the first number is negative. And it's always nice to make sure that the first number, if it's negative, to kind of make sure that the negative is part of the GCF. Okay, so 15, 3, and 18, they're all divided by, they're all divisible by 3, right? But I'm going to go ahead and write negative 3 because the first term is negative. Now, if we look at the letters, they all have at least one M in common. So, one M in common. So my GCF is going to be negative 3M. Negative 3M. Negative 3M. Okay. So we're going to set up our parenthesis, and then we're going to put negative 3M in front there. And let's divide. What's negative 15 divided by negative 3? That's positive 5. What's m to the third divided by m? M squared. What's positive 3 divided by negative 3? Is a negative 1, right? And then m to the second divided by m is m. And then what is negative 18 divided by negative 3? It's positive 6. Sorry, 6. And then what's m divided by m? It cancels. And I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this as just negative 1m. It's the same thing as negative m. Okay, and this is my answer for this example. Again, feel free to pause at any point in the video just to make sure you got all the steps down. Alright, now last example, number 4. Let's see if I can speed it up a little bit, right? Because we're all getting kind of familiar with what we have to do, right? 12, 24, and 10. What are they all divisible by? Well, 10 is 5 times 2, and I can't divide 24 and 12 by 5, but I can divide them by 2. So for sure, 2 is part of the GCF, and they all have, at the very minimum, one n in common. So my GCF is 2n. So that's what I'm going to divide all these terms by. So I'm going to put 2n parentheses and then divide, right? 12 divided by 2, 6. N to the 4th divided by n is n to the 3rd. Negative 24 divided by 2 is negative 12. N to the 2nd divided by n is n. And negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. And then n divided by n will cancel. Okay, and then that's my final answer. All right, so thank you for joining me today, guys. This video was really short. There was only 4 examples, and again, we were just practicing finding the GCF. And in the next class, we'll continue practicing, a different aspect of factoring the GCF. But have a great day, guys, and thank you for joining me. See you in class.